Welcome to Something Rhymes with Purple. This is a podcast all about words and language, and it's presented by me, Gyles Brandreth, based in London, in the United Kingdom, and my colleague and long-standing friend, the world's leading lexicographer, in my view. That's not her own opinion, but she is recognized internationally as one of the great wordsmiths of our time. It's Susie Dent, who is in Oxford, home of the
Hello.
Oxford English Dictionary. How are you? How's everything been for you, Susie?
Yeah, I am. I'm very well, actually. It's been quite a long week for me because I've had lots of countdown recordings. For those who do watch the show in Britain and it's in some places across the world, it's a game show, and we pre-record them. So we do 5 shows a day, and we do 3 of those days in a week. So that's 15 shows in 3 days. So it's quite heavy going, but a lot of fun. And as you know, I love talking about words and look forward to continuing now.
And have you seen the exciting news that I saw reported in the papers? Some work that's been done, I think it was at York University, establishing that languages that we may have learnt as children, they're still lurking in our head. Did you read about this? Do you know about this?
No.
This will really encourage you. You know, I learnt French as a small boy, and you learnt German when you were a girl, and you were often quoting German. I know it's your favourite language other than English.
Yeah.
And it turns out that speaking a language like German or French, if you learned it as a child, it's just like riding a bicycle. And the ability never leaves you, even if you don't practice it. And
Wow.
this is real research has been done on this. A study is suggesting that people who learnt a foreign language in school are as good at speaking it 50 years after their last exam as they were when they studied it. Isn't that amazing?
That is. That's incredible.
Yeah. Even if people who'd not used the skill, in the intervening half century, they were found to be as adept as they were when they got the qualification at 16. 500 people who'd taken French GCSE on A-level in the 1970s, they were asked to do a French vocabulary and grammar test, and the results showed no significant drop-off in performance. Isn't that amazing? And this underlines what I have long thought, that if it's in there, particularly in terms of words and language, it really is in there. That's why you can recover, for example, the nursery rhymes or the poems you learnt when you were a small child. It's all in there, which is fantastic. And you can open the beaker, open the vessel, and pour out the words.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that because what I want us to talk about today is unleashing the vessel, pouring out the words, and things to do with vessels.
Receptacles.
Receptacles. That's what we want to talk about. Water vessels.
Yes.
What do you? I have water in a glass. Do you have water during these recordings?
I don't actually have anything at the moment. I should do. I have water all the way through in the studio, but sometimes I put in, you can get those fizzy vitamin tablets that you drop in. I always try and sneak one of those into my glass whenever I'm recording Countdown, and then I'm told promptly to put it under the desk because it looks like a urine sample. Oh. So, but normally it is a glass, yes.
But there were people who would drink their own. Was it Mahatma Gandhi or Mr. Nehru? I remember.
There was a lot of people. And the actor Sarah Mills, if you remember her.
Sarah Miles.
She used to do
different
that too.
family, but same idea. They drank their own urine and said it was very good for you.
Well, we've talked about this in our medical episode, I think, that there were doctors who could diagnose what kind of diabetes people suffered from by tasting their urine. So if it was sweet, it is diabetes mellitus. And if it was insipid, it is diabetes insipidus. So the 2 types of diabetes. And they became known as piss prophets. Yes.
Only a few minutes in, and people are thinking all over the world, this is why I tune in to learn about the piss prophets. Well, I want to learn all about vessels, jugs, pitchers, ewers, beakers, and I want you to feel, if you're listening to this, people sometimes say to me, where do you dredge these things up from, these stories that you tell, these names? Well, I don't dredge them up. They're in there. And what I've discovered from this research is that everything we knew as children, it's all in there, waiting to come out again. And I want to draw from you, Susie Dent, today, the origins of some of these words. Can we begin with the very water vessel itself? A vessel.
Yes.
Tell me about a vessel.
It's quite simple, its story, really. So it came from the Romans, and we all know that, drinking vessels are some of the earliest artifacts that have ever been found from ancient civilizations. And in this case, it comes from late Latin vasellum, which means little vessel. Essentially, it meant exactly the same thing. But vessel has got so many different applications in English and in life. It's a container used to hold liquid, which is how we're talking about it today. In biblical use, it's a person who embodies a particular quality. Lord, use this lowly vessel. Let me serve you as you will. In anatomy, it's a channel or a duct that conveys blood or other bodily fluid. And in botany, it's one of the tubular structures in a plant in its vascular system that conducts water and minerals and nutrients from the root. So lots and lots of different meanings, but all go back to that idea of being something that carries, that holds, and that sort of, almost comes to embody something.
Very good. Did you ever see the film that was, for me, my favourite film of my childhood, The Court Jester, with Danny Kaye?
No.
People of my generation will all be, when they hear the word vessel, they immediately think about the vessel with the pestle that has the brew that is true. There was a sequence in this film where Danny Kaye has a conversation about where some poison has been placed. And Griselda, who is helping him, says, listen, I have put a pellet of poison in one of the vessels. Which one? The one with the figure of a pestle. So the vessel with the pestle, yes, but you don't want the vessel with the pestle. You want the chalice from the palace. Oh, I don't want the vessel with the pestle. I want the chalice from the palace. The chalice from the palace, yeah. It's a little crystal chalice with the figure of a palace. So the chalice from the palace has the pellet with the poison. No, the pellet with the poison's in the vessel with the pestle. Oh, the pellet with the vessel, the pestle with the vessel with the pestle. What about the palace from the chalice? Anyway, it goes on like this. It is hilarious.
Wow.
And I recommend it. And go to YouTube. If any of you haven't heard this song sung or this whole number, this routine, you're in for a treat. The Vessel with the Pestle, Danny Kaye, The Court Jester. Vessel. Chalice is more of a religious thing, isn't it?
Yes, we think about the chalice at communion, don't we, as well? And so that goes back to the Latin calix, which meant a cup, essentially. So again, a sort of another ancient word with lots of what we call cognates in other languages, denoting a kind of goblet of some kind. So you know what gob means. It means mouth. Essentially. So in French, gober was to open one's mouth. It also gave us, do you remember, I think one of my trios once upon a time was the gob mouche, which translates literally as a fly swallower, and denoting somebody who's so gullible because their mouth is open all the time and they will just literally swallow anything. So a gobelet is related to the gob that is the mouth. That's the goblet.
Goodness. So you let things into the mouth with a goblet. I mean, that's how you use your goblet.
Exactly.
Le gobelet.
Yeah.
What about a jug?
Jug is a strange one for such a sort of earthy, English word. You'd think that it just had a very simple kind of Germanic origin, maybe something from Latin, but we don't know quite where it comes from. But there are conjectures that it's linked to the name Joan or Joanna, and a nickname was jug or juggin. Now, particularly, this was applied to a maidservant or a mistress. It was a kind of term of slight disparagement, really. Just as, do you remember we've spoken in the past about how proper names are applied to objects or certain professions. So an Abigail was a lady's maid, for example. So there is a chance that it goes back to Joan or Joanna. And because they were maidservants, perhaps the idea is that they were carrying jugs for the household. But, its journey is very unclear and hazy.
Okay, I'm not sure about that one. A pitcher.
A pitcher. So this is what the Americans call a jug. And this isn't related to the pitchfork, where pitching is just sort of literally throwing or heaving something or sort of, sticking a tool in something. It actually goes back to the old French picher, meaning a pot, which in turn is based on Latin picarium.
A ewer.
Do you know, this was a new one to me, really. So a ewer is if I look this up, it's usually the trade name for a bedroom water jug. So if you go back, I guess, century or so, you will find people obviously with no taps or faucets, but just with a basin and a jug where they would perform their morning ablutions. So that's a ewer. Is that how you understand it?
Yes. It is.
Yes. Okay. So not related to a female sheep at all, and everything to do, strangely, with an old French corruption, I suppose, of the Latin aquaria, simply from aqua meaning water. So it kind of morphed quite a lot in the course of its journey. But again, it's a receptacle for water, but it kind of zoomed in rather on that very specific sense of a pitcher with a wide spout that is used for morning washing.
Is a beaker something you drink out of or something you pour from?
A beaker? Interesting. I would say a beaker. I would normally use beaker if there was one in my cupboard for a kind of plastic children's drinking cup.
Yeah.
That's what I would call a beaker. And nothing to do with beaks, as you might imagine.
That's extraordinary.
And everything to do with the Viking word bika, meaning a drinking bowl. Or large drinking container. So a bit of a false friend there. You might think it's, your beaker's your mouth and you put your beaker in your mouth. But no, it's from the Vikings.
There are grander words too, an amphora.
Again, you will find amphora, ancient amphora, in many museums, and sort of their design is often quite sort of ornate and elaborate. So it's a two-handed vessel, and it was used by the ancients for holding wine or often oil, but always with two handles, often oval-bodied, and they have this kind of pointed base. And with the Greeks, I think an amphora was also about 9 gallons, so it was a liquid measure as well. And it simply goes back to the word amphi, or the prefix amphi, meaning on both sides. And the forius was carried, so it's carried on both sides because of those two handles. And it's that amphi also gave us other words in English, like an amphibian, somebody who can exist in both water and on land. So it's the kind of both sense of things.
This is not a word with which I am familiar at all, but I've come across it looking up things to talk about today. The aquamanile. It's a jug apparently in the shape of an animal. Is this a well-known word?
Yes, and it's quite incredible. So I think it's aquamanile, that's how or aquamanili as well, is from the Latin, and it was a basin for washing the hands. And it didn't really specify an animal until the 19th century, when it was frequently one made in the form of an animal or a bird. And they can be quite elaborate and quite wonderful. But it goes back to aqua meaning water, and the manus, the hand, that you'll find in lots of other words like manicure, manipulate, etc.
Yeah. There's a creamer here, which is a small jug for milk or cream. And it's called a creamer, I assume, simply because it contains cream.
Exactly. Yeah, simple as that.
Oh, here's
simple as that.
An interesting one. A pour-on, a wine pitcher with a long, thin spout. I've never heard of have you heard of a pour-on?
I've seen them before, but I didn't know Poron is what it was called. So it originated in Catalonia, and the whole point of it is that it's handed around a group, and it's got one of those long, thin spouts, so you can open your mouth and pour the wine, if it is wine, directly into your mouth without having to touch it with your lips. And that's why it can get passed around a group, because it's very hygienic. You're not putting your lips to it.
I'm not familiar with that. The only kind of vessel I am familiar with for pouring wine from is the carafe. We'll have a carafe of wine, which I take to be a French word, carafe. But is that its origin? Is it French in origin?
It's actually Arabic, believe it or not, a carafe. So again, a bit of a false friend. I like it. It did sound a bit French. And I think it probably came to us via French, but ultimately it's probably from the Persian or the Arabic, meaning pretty much the same thing, but ultimately from a verb meaning to draw or lift water.
You gave us the vessel with the pestle and the chalice with the palace. What about the flagon with the dragon? Flagon. Is it related to flask? Where does that come from?
It is related to flask, and so nothing particularly spectacular here. Quite a sort of simple one, and I think it arrived in sort of medieval English. There is flascon or flasconem in Latin, meaning a flask, and they're all related. But the reason I like this one, Gyles, is that it's actually related, bizarrely, to the word fiasco. So fiasco today is a totally humiliating failure. But in Italian in the 19th century, a fiasco was a bottle related to flask and flagon. And far fiasco was to make a bottle, literally. But it began to be used in the theatre to mean to kind of slip up or fail in a performance. And no one quite knows why. Possibly You know, we kind of think in English of bottling it, don't we? But that came a bit later from the rhyming slang bottle and glass arse, because you fall on your arse. So this came before. So it's possible that it's referring to a glassmaker's botched efforts to make a glass bottle, but nobody quite knows. Shrouded in mystery, that one. But flask and fiasco are actually etymological cousins.
So losing your bottle, where does that expression?
Same thing. It means that you sort of the bottom's you sort of you fall on your arse, I suppose.
Gosh.
Yeah, bottle and glass arse.
So you lose your bottle. When you say to somebody, "Oh, you lost your bottle," meaning you've lost your nerve.
Yes.
It's because you ended up on your arse, because it's rhyming slang.
And
bottle
also
and
we
glass
had
arse. Are you
Aristotle
sure?
as well. So Aristotle was used too for your arse, and that was all kind of part of the mix too. Your Aristotle, your bottle and glass. Yeah.
Oh, how interesting. You've fallen on your Aristotle, meaning you've fallen on your backside.
We're staying with that, falling on your arse. So it's the same kind of idea, far fiasco.
Well, I love a jug, and I love a Toby jug. Now, what's interesting to me is I think that you drink from a Toby jug, but you pour something into a Toby jug from an ordinary jug. Is a Toby jug something you pour from or drink from, and why is it called a Toby jug?
Now this is a lovely one. Well, I'm going to sort of start backwards. I'm going to start with the mug, because most of us use mugs for our tea or our coffee or whatever. Now, have you any idea what the link might be between the mug that we drink from and either being mugged, unfortunately, if you are stolen from and rather nastily on the streets, or having an ugly mug?
No.
Any idea?
Mug to me means face.
Yeah.
Is that the connection?
It is the connection, because if you go back a couple of centuries, you will find mugs with kind of caricatures of faces on them. So Charles Dickens, I think, refers to these quite a lot as well. So these sort of mugs that represented this kind of grotesque human face became very popular, particularly, I think, in the 18th century. That gave us the origin of mug as a face. Then it gave rise to the idea of a mug as an insult for a stupid person, because their face was kind of blank and unintelligent. And then mug became a term for somebody who's been duped, really, by a card sharp or a confidence trickster who's sort of been mugged or mugged off. And it's a mug's game. But they all go back to the face sense, because to mug was originally a boxing term meaning to punch someone in the face. So if you have been pickpocketed, you have metaphorically been slapped in the face. So they're all linked. And the mugs that we drink from, as I say, are all associated with that idea of the mug as a face. And I mentioned that because you were talking about Toby jugs. And Toby jugs also were... They sort of carried a human form, didn't they? They were jugs in the form of a stout old man in a tricorn hat. And they were said to be based on a hard drinker from Yorkshire called Henry Elwes, and his nickname was Toby Philpot. Philpot, obviously a play on fill your pot. So we think that is where it comes from. But some think it was named after Sir Toby Belch from Twelfth Night, I have to say, the Toby jug. So just to add that in. But my bet is on that stout old man in a tricorn hat.
Very good.
The last thing
Yes.
is a toss pot. And I know I've talked to you about this before when we talked about drinking in one of our past episodes, but a toss pot was originally, like Toby Philpot, somebody who tossed their pot of beer back and enjoyed the contents a little bit too often, with the result that their behaviour became both obstreperous and disorderly.
We've had a most intriguing letter from Nick about a cat named Bo. This is from Nick Seymour, who says, "Hi, Susie and Gyles. I was just listening to the Feelies episode, F-E-L-E-S, and was amused by the story of the name of Susie's cat, Bo. I have a friend who has a cat named Bo as well, but with a similarly interesting origin. About 2 years ago, my friend Charles was walking home and heard the mewling of a distressed cat. After following the sound, they discovered the cat was inside the front of a parked car. With the help of a firefighter, they opened the car up and rescued the kitten inside. Charles has lived in the United States almost all of his life, but his family is from South Africa and England. So his accent and vocabulary will slip into a less Americanized mode, particularly after he's been spending time with family. As such, he named his new kitten Bo, short for Bonnet, where they'd found him. I think it's so clever, since all his American friends know that part of the car as the hood. So they don't pick up on it from the story without the extra translation. They most often assume he's named after the comedian Robert Bo Burnham. Loving the podcast from Philadelphia. Susie, do you know the work of Robert Pickering Bo Burnham? The American comedian, musician, writer, actor, director.
I don't.
His work often combines elements of musical, sketch and stand-up comedy, apparently, with auteur filmmaking. He's only 32, and people are calling themselves Bo because of him. That's amazing.
Oh, well, that's much more upmarket than my Bo, as you know, who is named after Bo Peep, or was, by Battersea Cats and Dogs Home. So no such cultural associations for mine. But just to remind you about the bonnet and the hood, in British, the bonnet is the metal canopy, obviously, that covers the engine. It's all about covering, really. So as a bonnet covers the head, so likewise a hood covers the head. It's as simple as that. But there's distinction between British and American English there.
Very good. Whenever the people I know called Bo, it's usually an abbreviation for Bosie, as in Bosie Douglas, the boyfriend of Oscar Wilde, who was known as he was known as Bosie because when he was a boy, I think he pronounced he was known as sort of Boise, and that became Bosie. Anyway.
Oh, okay.
Childhood names.
Well, we have one of my favourite emails also came in, I have to say, this week, from James Patterson, who is a Tintin fan. Are you a Tintin fan, Gyles?
Hergé, I love Tintin. Le Capitaine Haddock, the Thompson twins, absolutely.
Oh, yes, Snowy.
Exactly. Snowy in English, Milou in French.
Yes, Milou. You'll enjoy this. So this is from James Patterson, who says, Dear Susie and Gyles, while reading the Tintin comic Prisoners of the Sun, I came across several inventive insults hurled by Captain Haddock. Can you enlighten as to their origins and meanings? Okay, so the ones that he's come across here in Prisoners of the Sun, I have to say my favourite is blistering barnacles, which he says a lot. This is an old sea dog. What's his relationship with Tintin? I've forgotten.
Oh, he's a kind of, they're allies. Captain Haddock is his friend.
Yeah, he's a friend.
He's absolutely a friend.
Yes, okay. So these are the ones. I'll just run through them very quickly and then I'll try and enlighten you, James, if I can. So there's slubberdigullions, bashy bazooks, pithecanthropic. So it's really hard to say. Pithecanthropic mountebanks. All of these with exclamations after them. Poltroons, that's another really good one. And finally, dorifors as well. So I don't remember these ones from Tintin. I think I read them. I need to go back to them, really. I love the Tintin shop in London's Covent Garden. If you just go in there, we'll get completely lost. I have a Tintin clock in my house. Anyway, I will try and enlighten you on these because these are all derived, bar one, as far as I can see, from the Oxford English Dictionary, or at least you would say that Hergé knew his vocabulary. So slubberdigullions, I think it's been one of my trio before. It's a slobbering or dirty fellow. That's how a slubberdigullion is defined in the dictionary from the 17th century, or a worthless sloven. And the first mention from 1612 is contaminous, pestiferous slubberdigullions, which itself is worthy of Captain Haddock, I think. Then there is bashy bazooks. Now, I couldn't find this anywhere, and I think, but this is my guess, and James, you might have your own, it might be a riff on gadzooks or adzooks, which in turn were sort of minced oaths, as we call them, or euphemisms for adzooks, God's hooks, and they referred to the nails on the cross. So these were verbal sidesteps from using the Lord's name in vain. That's all I can think of with bashy bazooks. Do you have any idea for that, Gyles?
What I want to say is this. You're mentioning Hergé because he is the creator of Tintin.
Oh, did he not write it?
Well, no, he did write it in French.
Yeah.
But I happen to know, when I began working in publishing in the early 1970s, I worked with a man called Michael Turner. And he and another person, a lady, whose name I'm trying to remember, they were the translators, I think, of Tintin. And I think that they will be, and he was into words and language in a very big way. I think
Of course. How stupid of me.
I think these are the translators' works of genius.
Of course.
Inspired, absolutely, because they kept very accurately, because they had to go with the pictures to what was going on in the story. But I think these are brilliant British inventions. Or maybe I have a slight recollection that the lady involved may have been Australian. So I'm going to...
Also, they knew their dictionaries, of course, yes, not Hergé himself, although, as you say in French, they will be equally inventive. But Bashi Bazooka eluded me a little bit. On to the Pithecanthropus. Now, he says Pithecanthropic mountebanks. And I've talked about mountebanks before. These were the charlatans who would sell their quack wares at markets up and down medieval Britain, and they would mount a bank or a bench in order to sell them and proclaim to the crowd. So they were charlatans and frauds, essentially. And Pithecanthropus was a hypothetical creature that was said to bridge the gap in evolutionary development between an ape and a man. So it's an ape man. So what Captain Haddock is saying, you're sort of, you're only half human and you're stupid. And we all know that apes really aren't, but that was his insult of choice. A poltroon, that goes back to the Latin pullus, meaning a young chicken. So that's quite established in English. And finally, I didn't know this, Dorifor. Did you know this one, Gyles?
No. Go on for it.
No. So it comes from the French Dorifor, meaning a Colorado beetle originally. But the English sense was introduced apparently by Sir Harold Nicholson, who introduced it to mean a person who draws attention to the minor errors made by others. So really sort of annoyingly pedantic and quite pestering with it. And so in The Spectator from 1949, Harold Nicholson says, these Colorado beetles will have spent hours searching for a misprint in the Oxford English Dictionary. Although these Dorifors may achieve the short delight of proving that an author has made a mistake on page 479, they will never know the long, slow pleasure of writing a large book with continuous application. So it's a persistent critic.
I do recommend the diaries of Sir Harold Nicholson. They are among the best 20th century English diaries. He was a politician as well as a writer, and I was lucky enough to know his son, Nigel Nicholson. And if people are listening who can tell us all about the translations of the Tintin books, I would be grateful. We would be grateful, because I don't think we've credited the right people, and I think it's quite a complicated story, because, of course, Hergé, Georges Remy, was born a long time ago, back in 1907, and he died. I remember he died in the 1980s, and he created 24 Tintin books as Hergé, and they were translated over many years by many different hands. And the person I mentioned, Michael Turner, he may not have been the first translator, but I do remember that, because I read them first in French, Tintin was Tintin, Dupont became Thompson and Thompson, Milou became Stowe, Captain Haddock wasn't changed, Bianca Castafiore was unchanged. Can you remember what Professor Tournesol became?
Sunflower?
No, Professor Calculus.
That's what it means. Oh,
does
calculus,
mean sound.
of course.
So they
of
obviously
course.
did.
I didn't think there was a sunflower in Tintin. Yes, calculus, of course.
So it's quite interesting. Let's explore more. And if you do know the answers, and if you are a descendant, because I don't think they'll be still with us, or maybe they are, if you are the translator of Tintin into English and, of course, many other languages, please get in touch with us and tell us more about it.
Yeah, hats off to you and incredible language skills.
We're purple at somethingelse.com.
We are. And it's time for my trio and Gyles's poem. And by the way, if you're struggling with any of the spelling for my trio, because I realised that I could go quite quickly with these, they can be found in the programme description blurb of each episode, along with the title and the author of Gyles's poem. So that will give you more info there. Right, well, I'm going to start with something related to drinking vessels, Gyles. I think it's been one of my trio, but from a long while ago, from one of the early episodes. And that's a zarf. You remember what a zarf is?
I do. It's what you put around a hot coffee cup. It's the piece of cardboard that goes around a hot coffee cup to keep it less hot. Is that right?
Exactly. That's absolutely right. That's the modern incarnation, but actually it goes back to the incredibly ornamental, ornate, often golden cup-shaped holders that were used for hot coffee cups in Eastern countries. So some of them are really, really beautiful. But yes, that's what you, rather pretentiously, if you like, can go in to your local coffee shop and ask for. Could I have a zarf instead of a sleeve? So that's my first one. The second one, it might lead you astray, this one, but it's aprosexia. aprosexia, and it is an inability to concentrate due to a distracted mind. Now, the distracted mind has nothing to do with sex. Actually, this goes back to meaning without in Greek, and then prosexis meaning heedfulness. So in other words, you're not concentrating on what you're doing because your mind is elsewhere. Aprosexia, quite a useful one, I think. And finally, I just love the sound of this, and just the very act of doing it is something that we should all do more often. Froonce, F-R-O-O-N-C-E, froonce, and it means to frolic exuberantly. We could all do with more froonцing, don't you think?
Very much so. How intriguing.
Well, it's
Very
time
good.
for your poem for us.
Well, I thought I would do something a little bit different this week. Beautifully imagined poems. This little volume came through the post. Beautifully imagined poems, said Sir Derek Jacobi. I thought, well, I'll read one of these. The book is called Lilac White by Martin Hesford. And I just dipped into it. And I'm going to read one of the poems to you. See if it strikes you as unusual. It strikes me as quite unusual. It goes like this. The glamour is coming. The Victorian ghosts are being hung back into their wardrobes. The new apparitions are rising. Do not be angry. Do not be afraid. It has been one way, your way, for a very long time. Share and share alike my genderless lipstick. Kiss me, honey, honey, kiss me. I forgive you, I love you. Will you love me ever? I am your eyes, shadow, your lilac, white, sparkle, star, flower.
Ooh, it's got a sting, that one, hasn't it?
It is. I don't quite understand it. I think I see where it's coming from, and it's making us try to look at love and relationships in new ways.
In different ways, yeah.
But anyway, it's
always been your way. Also, that kiss me, honey, honey, kiss me, right? There was that song in there.
Anyway,
interesting.
Martin Hesford, he's a BAFTA-nominated writer. He wrote the screenplays for Fantabulosa, starring Michael Sheen. That was all about Kenneth Williams. And a wonderful film that I loved, Mrs. Lowry and Son, which was about the artist Lowry, who was played by Timothy Spall, and Vanessa Redgrave played Mrs. Lowry. I really recommend that movie if you can get to see it. And I think his poetry is rather intriguing.
Yeah, very intriguing. Well, we hope you loved it too, and we're so happy that you are following us and listening in, whether or not you are members of the Purple Club or indeed the Purple Plus Club, where you can find us ad-free and with a few sort of extra bits and pieces that we have a lot of fun recording. We're on social media too. You can find us on @SomethingRhymes on Twitter and Facebook, or @SomethingRhymesWith on Instagram. Something Rhymes with Purple is a Something Else and Sony Music Entertainment production. It was produced by Harriet Wells with additional production from Chris Skinner, Jen Mystery, Jay Beale, and the man himself. Is he a Captain Haddock or is he a Tintin, do you think?
He certainly needs translation.
Definitely Haddock.
Yeah, indeed. Absolutely.
He's got the beard.
Actually, he does look a little bit. I always liked Captain Haddock, it must be said. Didn't you like him?
Yeah. I did actually. Should we call Gully Haddock from now on?
Yeah, he's our Captain Haddock.